The Buffalo Bills haven't looked great this season. They're 4-2, but they've lost 2 consecutive games going into the bye. Now they've had a week and a half to figure it out. Is it about game planning, schematics, player usage, fundamentals, or is it about a frosty approach to coaching? I'm going to tell you what I think today on the Ralph Rant. Let's go.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant, your source for hard-hitting Buffalo Bills takes. Now, here's your host of the Ralph Rant, that veteran watcher of generations of Bills teams, the prophet who predicted Josh Allen's greatness, that opinionated so-and-so you've walked out on parties because of, the Ralph.
Welcome to the Ralph Rant. I am your host, the Ralph. Thank you ever so much for being here. On today's episode, we are continuing our discussion of the Bills coaching staff. And whereas I've made a lot of comparisons to the Bills staff to staffs around the league, today I've got some more pointed examples directly about the Bills. But before I get into that, I have to extend a huge thanks to everyone who has come out in support of this channel. We have seen a ton of views. We've got a ton of new subscribers, and we are approaching 1,000 subs for that matter. And of course, all the comments have been great, and they do form an inspiration for these shows. So thank you very much for that. And if indeed you are not part of the channel, I urge you to take the nanosecond required to hit that subscribe button, and you will be part of our show and our content as we go forward this season. And again, I appreciate the likes and the comments. Keep those coming. But let's get into what we're going to talk about today. And the first segment is entitled Control Over Connection. And I want to talk about how the Bills actually conduct their coaching process during the games. And then we're going to talk about the $31 million lesson, the Diggs trade. And I've got some strong opinions about that with the coaching side of it in mind. And then we're going to talk about Bills safety Taylor Rapp and his supposed regression that we're hearing about from a lot of the film analysis shows. I've got a different take on that, as you might guess. And then we're going to move on to Keon Coleman's public correction and what my opinion of Sean McDermott's handling of that was. And then finally, again, going back to a theme I've kind of had for the last couple of episodes, we're talking about coaching with fire and not with ice. So without further ado, let's blow the horn and go. When Sean McDermott became the head coach of the Buffalo Bills in 2017, he certainly came in with a heavy burden to bear. The Buffalo Bills had just completed 17 straight seasons without a playoff appearance that we now call the drought. And so he had a large order in front of him to get this team on track. And one of the things he preached when he came in was the process. And based on necessity, he took over the team and really took control of many things that were going on. And whereas you see oftentimes in teams the general manager is actually perhaps more powerful than the head coach, in this organization it became abundantly clear that Sean McDermott was the head honcho. And I believe he still is. And I believe he likes to exercise that control. But it makes me wonder, with the interesting and unique situation of the Buffalo Bills having both coordinators up in the booth on game day, rather than either one of them being on the sideline, is that as much about those coordinators' choices, Joe Brady and Bobby Babich? Is that about their choice to be up in the booth? And you'll hear from the Bills that it certainly is. But it is also, perhaps to me, a bit of control being exercised by Sean McDermott. And this would be fine if we saw what I believe needs to be more fire and more emotion from Sean McDermott in running this team and giving his team a personality while on the sideline. But I don't see that from him, and we don't have coordinators on the sideline to do that either. So that's my question. Is this control over connection? Because I see that we are missing connections with our players on the field with coordinators who are inspiring them, who are talking to them face to face and communicating and getting guys together in a huddle together on the sideline and talking about what needs to be done to win a football game or even get out of a slump when you're in a portion of the game. But those guys aren't there, and I never see McDermott gather his players around. So that's a big question and a big example of what I'm calling this frosty approach to coaching, the control over connection. Let's move on to the next segment. When the Buffalo Bills acquired Stefon Diggs via trade from the Minnesota Vikings, it was a great moment in Josh Allen's career, because what we had was a situation where Josh now had a receiver he could really count on. He could get layups to him, and of course he had Cole Beasley at that time too. The Bills had him set up very well to be able to get targets out there and have confidence and be able to rely on a receiver to get you out of trouble on third downs and so forth. And as time went along, of course, the Bills were winning division championships. They were getting into the playoffs. Of course, they were losing to the Chiefs for most of those years, with the exception of the one bad year, of course, via loss to the Bengals. But the fact is, we saw that Stefon Diggs was one of the most fervent players on the Bills. You could tell he wanted it the most. You could see how disappointed he was when the Bills didn't get it. And I'm sure this is a guy who has had a storied career and really wanted to win a championship and thought he was close with the Bills, and it didn't happen. And he apparently got disgruntled, as of course you might expect a player who wants greatness that is not getting it. And that devolved into a situation where he was termed to be a diva, once again, just like in Minnesota. But I'm wondering why that had to become so public, and I'm wondering if the Bills coaching staff, with or without a sports psychologist as they now have, would have been able to forestall the problems with Stefon Diggs and get this situation straight by actually having control and actually having a hand on these types of situations that develop on the team, rather than have them become public. It needed to be dealt with early on, and it wasn't dealt with. We remember Sean McDermott talking about Diggs not being in camp, making that public, rather than in private, getting this situation taken care of. And once again, I point to the coaching staff for not having the wherewithal to get the situation with Stefon Diggs straightened out and not make this $31 million mistake that ended up costing the Bills huge in dead cap and costing them the best receiver that Josh Allen has had since he's been in Buffalo. I think it was a mistake, and I think it's just another thing to point at the coaching staff for not getting this solved and instead having it be a public matter and letting it get to the point where you're getting tweets from Diggs and you're getting press conferences talking about this and that, where Diggs isn't at minicamp or isn't at the voluntary or involuntary workouts, whatever it may have been. It should have never gotten to that situation. And once again, I blame the frosty approach to coaching that the Bills have. This could have been prevented. Let's talk about some more and move on. One of the significant things we saw in the downfall of Stefon Diggs was during his last season here, he had a lot of production early on, but then that production started to regress as we went into the end of the season. You can go back and look at the stats to see how much it fell off. Now, was this due to his ability? I don't think so. We just saw him do very well against the Bills a couple of weeks ago. It was due to coaching. It was due to his attitude on the team and due to his usage, which may have been part of what the attitude was. But getting to the point here, I've heard a lot of talk this season about the formerly nasty safety Taylor Rapp being referred to as having regressed, is not playing as well this season based on film analysis that we've seen. And I've also heard talk on certain other shows that, the Bills should go trade for Budda Baker from the Arizona Cardinals, or a couple of other safeties being mentioned, because these are great safeties and they will come in and plug into the Bills and be great. I've got a problem with that notion. Taylor Rapp is 27 years old. He is in his prime. He's been on a Super Bowl roster. He has been great for the Bills. Are we attributing his fall off in play simply to the fact that he is losing some athletic ability when he should be in his prime? Perhaps it is inspiration. And again here, I point to coaching. Listen, Budda Baker could come in here and, per the wishes of many Bills fans, replace Taylor Rapp, and we might see a couple of good games, and then we might see the very same thing with Budda Baker that we're experiencing with Taylor Rapp right now. I don't buy it. I don't buy it. Taylor Rapp is a good ball player. He's nasty. He's ferocious. But we haven't been seeing that as much this season. Why? Why? And again, I have to look at this frosty approach for coaching. There is no one on the sideline even talking to him. I don't know what happens in practice. And of course, during the week, in a regular season, we're talking about having installs being done, and we're talking about what the other team is going to do, what the Bills defense can expect from the offense coming up. We're not talking about inspiring players and so forth. There's not a lot of time during the week. But there is time during the game. But again, there is nobody on the sideline inspiring him. If Sean McDermott is supposed to be the safety whisperer, perhaps during the commercial he's over whispering to Taylor Rapp. But we don't see Sean gathering up his safety group in a broadcast shot and talking to them and inspiring them and finding out what's going on. You know, I can compare this to being in bands in the past. I'm a musician, as you've heard me say many times on the podcast. And if you don't think there's a difference between going into a smaller, empty venue with a bunch of musicians who are perhaps more interested in drinking and girls than they are in going out and performing well, it could take your own performance and take you down a level because you have to be inspired to do that. You still have the talent to do what you're going to do, but you've got to have the inspiration and the attitude and the emotion. And I don't think that is being delivered to the Bills on the sideline, and in this case in particular to Taylor Rapp, because I don't believe for a minute he is regressed. I believe he's being incorrectly coached. And I'm not talking about fundamentals. I'm talking about inspiration, emotion, and attitude, because I'm looking for hostility and aggression from him and from this defense. And I'm not seeing that. And that has to be something that happens when coaching does what it's supposed to do. In the midst of the post-game horror following the loss on Sunday Night Football to the New England Patriots, where Stefon Diggs, by the way, showed the Bills what for and why, the assembled press corps asked the question, why was Keon Coleman absent from the field during the first series of the game? And without hesitation, Sean McDermott indicated that it was head coach discipline. Now, if it was bad enough to suspend, which essentially this was, to suspend Keon Coleman for part of the game, why not a quarter? Why not a half? Why just a series? See, it almost appears to be like a token suspension. It is almost as if McDermott wanted it to be public. And why would he want this to be public? Why would he be airing the dirty laundry of the Bills? Well, probably because he wanted to make an impact on Keon Coleman. But my problem with it is why, McDermott, could you not have just handled this in private? Was there nothing you could do in terms of executing head coach discipline or actually maybe working with the player and getting to the bottom of what's going on rather than just handing out school marmish type, hit your fingers with the ruler type of discipline that had to be made public? Again, I have a problem with this frosty, over-controlling coaching method that perhaps served McDermott well to get the Bills out of the drought. But at this point, it seems just cold to me, and it doesn't make any sense that that had to be made public. If you were going to suspend him and keep him out of the game, wouldn't it have been punishment enough for him to be out of the game and then use the excuse that, oh, he had an equipment problem or he had to go back to the locker room for some reason, as opposed to saying it was head coach discipline? I got a problem with it, and it's just another example of this frosty, over-controlling approach to coaching that seems to have infested the Buffalo Bills. Stick with me. In my last episode, I talked about the fact that the Buffalo Bills were unique in the NFL in the fact that neither the defensive nor offensive coordinator spends the game on the sideline. They are both up in the booth for the entire game. And while that's a bit more common for offensive coordinators, most defensive coordinators are down on the sideline. It was interesting, I even heard this question asked on another Bills podcast listening this morning, where someone asked the question, why are both coordinators in the booth? The host replied, well, if it was him, he would probably do so also because you could see the field, of course, from the booth. You've got everything spread in front of you, all your information, so you're able to actually maybe coach better from that standpoint. And furthermore, one could make the argument that, well, Sean McDermott is a defensive head coach, so perhaps he doesn't need the defensive coordinator on the sideline because he's down there pumping up the troops, working with them face to face when it comes to dealing with adversity or making an adjustment. But we don't see that either from Sean McDermott. We see him pretty much playing the role of head coach with a headset on and really not talking to groups of players while he is on the sideline. So, to me, this is a problem. And like I proposed earlier, maybe it's a matter of control that McDermott doesn't want the coordinators down there because he's the head coach. Again, this controlling aspect that he had to start when he took this team out of the drought. But again, I don't think it's working now. And the counterpoint to that is if you watched Monday Night Football, the early game with the Detroit Lions hosting the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and you saw brand new defensive coordinator Kelvin Shepard, and you remember Kelvin, he was a Bills linebacker for a time. Well, Kelvin Shepard replaced Aaron Glenn, who moved off to the New York Jets as head coach. So Shepard is now the defensive coordinator for the Lions. And what did we see during that game? Him up in the booth, surrounded with all his materials in front of him? Absolutely not. We saw him down on the sideline, running up and down the sideline, pumping his fists, cheering on his players, dealing with them in groups, and so forth throughout the game. Again, what I'm talking about here is coaching with fire, not with ice. Because that fire inspires players, and they need that. And the Bills don't have that, and they're not getting it from anyone on the sideline. And of course, I still maintain that a team will take on the personality of its coaching staff, of its head coach. And I just want to see more fire and less frost on the sideline. Because we could get in trouble in this season pretty quickly, like I mentioned in the last episode. But I'm hoping and praying as we approach this next game that we're going to see a change in the attitude on the sideline and a change in the tenor of the team. And we'll have to wait and see. Again, thanks so much for listening to the show or watching the show, however you may be consuming it. Again, I urge you to subscribe and like the video. You'll get this content all season long. So until we meet again, be good, do good, God bless, and go Bills. I am the Ralph, and this is the Ralph Rant. Out.